Have you ever wondered what it costs to seek truth? What if the price was your freedom, your family, and nearly your life itself? This is a story that will shake you to your core, a journey from devotion to persecution, from darkness to an encounter that changed everything. Stay with me, because what happened next defies explanation. Before we begin, I want to ask you something personal. Where are you watching from right now? Please leave a comment below with your country or city. You might think you're alone, but there's a global family here, brothers and sisters who need your prayers and who are praying for you. Let's connect. Let's pray for one another. We're stronger together. Now, let me take you back to 2018, to a place where faith became my battleground. The revolution that stole my dreams. My name is Munir Sadiq, and I was 43 years old when my world collapsed. But the cracks began forming much earlier, back when I was just a boy watching my homeland tear itself apart. I still remember being 15 during the revolution. Everyone around me buzzed with excitement about the changes coming to Iran. My father would gather us in our small living room after evening prayers, his voice filled with hope as he spoke about a new Iran, a righteous Iran. I believed him. I believed all of it. Growing up in Tehran, I was the son my father always wanted, faithful, studious, devoted to Allah in ways that made our local imam nod with approval. 5 times daily, I pressed my forehead to the prayer mat. During Ramadan, I fasted so strictly that my mother worried I would faint during my studies. I memorized vast portions of the Quran, the Arabic words flowing from my tongue like water from a fountain. My friends sometimes mocked me, calling me the little mullah, but I wore the name with pride. The mosque became my second home. I loved the way sunlight streamed through the colored windows during afternoon prayers, painting the carpets in blues and golds. I loved the smell of old books in the Islamic library where I spent countless hours. I loved feeling close to God, or at least, what I thought closeness to God meant. When I turned 18, I had one burning ambition: to become a doctor. I studied until my eyes burned and my hands cramped from writing notes. The university entrance exam was everything. In Iran, if you passed well enough, education was free, a gift from the government. I needed that gift. My family was not wealthy. I remember the day I took the exam. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone in the room could hear it. But I knew the material. I had prepared for years. When I walked out of that examination hall, I actually smiled. 90%, I thought. Maybe higher. Definitely enough for medical school. I applied to every medical school I could, and 2 dental schools as well, just to be certain. Then I waited. The letter came on a Thursday afternoon. My mother handed it to me with trembling hands, her eyes bright with hope. I tore it open right there in our courtyard, where she had been watering her jasmine plants. Rejected. The word felt like a physical blow. I read the letter 3 times, then 4, searching for a mistake. There had to be an explanation. It took several days of desperate inquiries before someone finally told me the truth. Someone had noticed me. Someone in authority. I had committed an unforgivable crime. I wore a suit to one of my classes. A Western-style suit that my uncle had given me for my birthday. Just clothing. Harmless fabric and buttons. But in the new Iran, that suit marked me as a sympathizer with the West. An enemy of the Islamic Republic. A threat. My file had been flagged. Red-marked. Rejected before my scores even mattered. I felt something crack inside me that day, not my faith, not yet, but my trust in the system I had believed would reward devotion and hard work. Instead of medical school, I received orders to report for military service. Not the regular army, but a special division, one known for taking young men with questionable politics and breaking them. My father's face went pale when he saw the orders. He knew what I would face there. The breaking point. The military camp sat in the desert, far from any city I knew. They transported us there in covered trucks, 30 of us packed so tightly we could barely breathe. The heat was suffocating even before the sun fully rose. They separated us immediately upon arrival. I was assigned to a unit commander whose name I will never forget, Commander Bashir. He was a tall man with a thick beard and eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. During our first formation, he walked slowly down our line, studying each face. When he reached me, he stopped. He asked me why I thought I was there. I replied that I was there to serve my country. He laughed, a sound without any warmth, and told me I was there because someone thought I needed correcting. He said the word slowly, correcting. The first weeks were designed to exhaust us. We woke before dawn and ran until some boys vomited. We did exercises in the blazing sun while commanders shouted verses from revolutionary songs. Those who stumbled faced punishment, sometimes push-ups until their arms gave out, sometimes being forced to stand at attention for hours while others ate. But the physical hardships were nothing compared to what came next. They began ideological sessions in the evenings. We sat on hard floors in a concrete building with no windows, listening to lectures about defending Islam, about martyrdom, about the glory of dying for the cause. The instructors would point to specific individuals and demand they repeat revolutionary slogans. Those who hesitated were noted. I was noted frequently. One evening, Commander Bashir called me to his office. It was a small room with a metal desk and 2 chairs. He did not tell me to sit. He opened my file. I could see my entrance exam scores right there on top, the numbers that should have earned me a future, and asked me if I considered myself a good Muslim. I said yes, of course. He asked me why, if I was such a good Muslim, I dressed like a Westerner and tried to enter schools that would fill my head with Western medicine and Western ideas. I tried to explain that medicine was universal, that healing people honored God regardless of where the knowledge came from. His fist slammed on the desk so hard I jumped. He told me I was contaminated. He said people like me were viruses that needed to be cleansed from Iran. Then he gave me a choice. I could volunteer for special assignment, frontline positions where martyrdom was almost certain, or I could remain in this camp and prove my devotion through other means. I asked what other means. He smiled for the first time. It was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. They put me in a cell. Not a prison cell exactly, but a small concrete room beneath the main barracks. It was perhaps 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. No window. One dim bulb that they controlled from outside. A bucket in the corner for waste. They told me this was my new residence until I learned to think correctly. The first day was merely uncomfortable. The second day, the bulb went out and did not come back on. In the darkness, time became meaningless. I could not tell if hours or days were passing. They brought food irregularly, sometimes what felt like twice in one day, sometimes nothing for what seemed like endless stretches. I prayed in that darkness. I recited every surah I had memorized, seeking comfort in the familiar words. But slowly, something strange began happening. The prayers felt hollow. The words seemed to echo back to me empty, like shouting into a void. Was this because of my doubt? Was Allah punishing me for questioning the system? The isolation did something to my mind. I began talking to myself, having arguments with imaginary commanders, rehearsing explanations that no one would hear. Sometimes I thought I heard scratching in the walls, rats perhaps, or my own mind inventing companions. They would pull me out every few days for interrogation. The sessions followed a pattern, questions about my loyalty, my beliefs, my family, my friends. They wanted names of others who might harbor Western sympathies. They wanted me to confess to crimes I had never committed. When I refused or could not give them what they wanted, the punishments varied. Sometimes they forced me to stand facing a wall for hours, my nose inches from the concrete, arms raised above my head. My shoulders would scream in agony. My legs would shake until they collapsed beneath me. Then they would drag me back to my feet and make me continue. Other times, they used water. They would lay me on a tilted board, cover my face with cloth, and pour. The sensation of drowning, of suffocating, of dying, over and over, while hands held me down and voices demanded answers I did not have. I learned something in those moments. The body has limits, but the mind breaks first. There came a point where I would have confessed to anything, said anything, betrayed anyone, just to make it stop. But I had nothing to confess. No conspiracies to reveal. I was simply a boy who wore a suit and wanted to be a doctor. One day, I had lost count of how many, Commander Bashir visited my cell personally. He crouched down where I sat huddled in the corner. He spoke almost gently, like a teacher addressing a slow student. He told me that this could all end. That I could return to a normal unit, serve my time, and go home. All I needed to do was one thing. I asked what that was. He pulled out papers. Official documents. He explained that they needed young men willing to go to the border, to face the threats against our nation, to become shaheeds, martyrs. He said this was my redemption. My chance to prove my faith was real. I stared at those papers, understanding what he was really saying. Sign these, go to the front lines, and most likely die within weeks. That was the choice, die quickly for the regime, or continue dying slowly in this cell. That night, alone again in the darkness, I made my decision. I had to escape. The mountain that almost killed me. Planning an escape from a military camp seemed impossible, but desperation makes you creative. I had noticed during my interrogation sessions that the facility was not as secure as it pretended to be. Guards grew lazy during night shifts. Patrols followed predictable patterns. And I had glimpsed, during one outdoor punishment session, a gap in the fence line near the waste disposal area. It took me 3 weeks of careful observation during the brief moments I was outside. 3 weeks of memorizing guard rotations, of noting which soldiers smoked together behind buildings, of mapping in my mind the route I would need to run. I had no supplies. No plan beyond getting over that fence. But staying meant dying, whether quickly on a battlefield or slowly in that concrete cell. The night I chose was moonless. During the evening meal, which they had recently started allowing me to take with others as a supposed mercy, I pocketed a piece of bread and some cheese. Pitiful rations for a journey, but all I could manage. At 2 in the morning, I made my move. The guard tower lights swept in predictable arcs. I waited in the shadow of the barracks, counting. 15 seconds of darkness. That was my window. I ran. My feet pounded the dirt. My heart threatened to explode. The fence approached, 3 meters of chain link topped with wire. I leaped, grabbed, climbed. The wire tore at my hands and clothes. I felt something rip into my leg but did not stop. At the top, I threw myself over, not caring about the fall. I hit the ground hard on the other side. Pain shot through my ankle. I bit down on my tongue to keep from crying out and tasted blood. Behind me, shouts erupted. Lights blazed. Alarms wailed. I ran into the desert darkness. For 3 days, I moved mostly at night, hiding during the day beneath whatever cover I could find, rocks, scrub brush, once in an abandoned irrigation ditch that stank of dead things. The bread and cheese lasted mere hours. I found a small stream on the second day and drank until my stomach cramped. My injured ankle swelled. The cuts from the fence wire became infected. Fever came and went in waves. But I knew going back meant death, so I pressed forward, heading west toward the border regions I had heard about. Toward the mountains. Toward Turkey. The mountains of northwestern Iran are beautiful and merciless. I had no proper clothing for the altitude, no equipment, no map. I followed the stars and the sun and the slope of the land. The cold was worse than the heat had been. At night, temperatures dropped until my teeth chattered so violently I thought they might break. I found a cave once and huddled inside, sharing the space with bats that shrieked and dove around my head. My infected cuts worsened. Red lines spread up my leg. The fever made me see things that were not there, my mother calling my name, Commander Bashir standing on distant ridges, lights in the darkness that disappeared when I blinked. I lost track of days. One blurred into another. I ate berries that made me sick. I climbed until my hands bled. I slipped on scree and tumbled down slopes that should have killed me. There were moments when I wanted to stop. To simply lie down in the cold and let it take me. What was the point? Even if I reached Turkey, then what? I was nobody, with nothing, running toward an uncertain future. But something kept pushing me forward. Not courage, I had none left. Something else. A voice inside that whispered I was not meant to die in these mountains. Finally, after what I later learned was 11 days, I saw lights in a valley. Real lights. A town. I stumbled toward it, barely conscious, my body functioning on instinct alone. Turkish border guards found me collapsed near a road. I remember hands lifting me, voices speaking a language I did not understand, the warmth of heated air as they carried me inside. I woke up in a hospital. Clean sheets. Real food. A doctor who treated my infections and bandaged my wounds. Through a translator, they told me I was lucky. Another few hours in the cold with my infections and I would have died. They transferred me to a refugee camp 2 weeks later. The coffee shop that changed everything. The refugee camp sat outside a small Austrian town. I ended up there through a process I still do not fully understand. Interviews, paperwork, buses, and planes. Everything felt like a dream, or like watching someone else's life. The camp was crowded. Hundreds of people from dozens of countries, all waiting, all hoping for asylum somewhere. We lived in converted barracks. Shared bathrooms. Shared kitchens. Shared frustration and fear. I spent my days in a fog of exhaustion. The physical wounds from my escape healed, but something inside me remained broken. I prayed mechanically, out of habit more than conviction. The words felt meaningless. What kind of God allowed good people to suffer for wanting education? What kind of God blessed a regime that put young men in cages? I was angry. At Iran. At Commander Bashir. At the universe. At God. Then I discovered the coffee shop. It sat directly across from the refugee camp, a small building with steamed windows and a hand-painted sign I could not read. But it was warm, and they allowed refugees to sit inside even if we bought nothing. I went there to escape the camp's oppressive atmosphere. To sit alone and pretend I was a normal person in a normal life. That was where I met Henrik. He was a tall Scandinavian man, maybe 30 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He worked at the coffee shop, and I noticed he always greeted refugees warmly. One day, he sat down at my table uninvited and asked, in halting Arabic, if I was okay. I was so surprised someone cared enough to ask that I almost cried. We began talking regularly. Henrik told me he was part of a Christian mission group that ran the coffee shop specifically to serve refugees. He explained they were there to help however they could: food, conversation, assistance with paperwork, prayer if anyone wanted it. I had never met a Christian before. In Iran, I had been taught they were lost people who worshipped 3 gods and whose scriptures were corrupted. Dangerous influences to avoid. But Henrik did not seem dangerous. He seemed kind. Over weeks, we talked about many things. He asked about my journey. I told him, leaving out the worst details. He listened without judgment, without trying to fix everything. Then one day, our conversation turned to faith. I explained Islam to him, the 5 pillars, the emphasis on submission to Allah's will, the importance of following the Prophet's example. I spoke with the passion of someone defending something precious, even though that precious thing felt increasingly hollow inside me. Henrik listened carefully. Then he asked me something no one had ever asked before. He wanted to know if I had a personal relationship with God. I did not understand the question. I told him that Allah was closer to me than my own jugular vein. That is what the Quran teaches. Of course I had a relationship with God. But Henrik pressed gently. He asked if I could talk to God like a friend. If God spoke back to me. If I felt loved by God, personally, specifically, individually. I realized I did not know how to answer. My relationship with Allah was about obedience, about submission, about performing the right rituals and following the right rules. But love? Friendship? Conversation? Henrik told me about Jesus. Not as a prophet. I already knew Jesus was a prophet in Islam, but as God's son. He explained how Christians believe God loved humanity so much that he came down himself, in human form, to bridge the gap between divine and human. I told him that was impossible. Blasphemous. Allah is one, indivisible. He does not have sons. Henrik did not argue. He simply said that he would pray for me, that God would reveal truth to me in whatever way I needed to see it. I left that conversation angry. Who was this Christian to tell me about God? I had studied Islam my entire life. I had memoized the Quran. I had suffered for my faith in that prison cell. But his question haunted me. Do you have a personal relationship with your God? The woman who would not stop. I met Insuk 3 months after arriving in Canada. The resettlement agency had finally processed my asylum claim, and I found myself in Toronto, living in a tiny apartment, trying to learn English, trying to figure out how to survive. She worked at a community center that offered free English classes to refugees. I went there desperate to learn the language, knowing it was my only path to any kind of future. In-suk was Korean-Canadian, in her 30s, with a bright smile that seemed too cheerful for someone dealing with traumatized refugees all day. She volunteered as a conversation partner, native English speakers who would practice with us. We were paired together randomly. From our very first meeting, she talked about Jesus. Not in a forceful way. She would weave it naturally into conversations. When I mentioned struggling with loneliness, she said Jesus was her constant companion. When I expressed frustration about my situation, she said Jesus gave her peace beyond circumstances. When I talked about feeling lost, she said Jesus was her guide. At first, I found it charming. Then annoying. Then deeply irritating. I started pushing back. I explained to her that yes, Jesus was a great prophet, I respected him. But he was not God's son. That was shirk, the unforgivable sin of associating partners with Allah.